Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Steve Cuss. Great to be with you today. The theologian Scott McKnight once said that people grow or change when they're either on a quest or in a crisis. And I've thought so much about that quote. And I think it's true. I think that our souls are more open when we're on a quest, when we're hungry, when we're yearning for something different. And of course, when we're in a crisis, our life is so disrupted, we tend to reach out. In a lot of ways, our church used that quote as kind of informative for our own ways of spiritual growth. We tried to invite people to join us on a quest, but also we tried to pay attention to when somebody might be in a crisis, something as simple as a job change or being laid off. And, sometimes a crisis isn't always something negative. Sometimes I think of crisis as disruptive. Like, for example, when you get married, that's not a crisis, but it certainly is a life shift. And so we tried to pay attention to the life transitions for people, good and bad, but also encourage people on a quest. In that journey, we made this fascinating discovery that God does unique work in temporary space. There's just something about stepping away from the routine of your life that can open your soul up to experiencing God in a new way. We partner with a local church camp where we send our kids and our teens, but also our adults. And there's something about that week of camp where you put away your technology, you focus more, you connect to God. I've been fascinated to look at temporary space. When you open the Bible, you see God doing particular work when people are on their own temporary journey. Maybe most famously, Jacob in the Old Testament, when he's running away from Esau and he's going to his uncle Laban's house. And on that temporary journey, God shows up in a particular way. So God does unique work in temporary space. And that's really what my guests are all about today, Brian and Peri Zahnd. Now, you might know Brian because he's written a whole slew of books. He has a lot of amazing things to say about faith and politics and nationalism and the cross of Jesus and the purity of the gospel. Brian has really helped a lot of us in that. But something that I've really enjoyed about Brian and Peri is that they intentionally put themselves in temporary space. Most famously, starting in 2016, when they walked the Camino in Spain, 500 miles, 40 days. It's the most popular pilgrimage in the world. About 250,000 pilgrims every year walk some length of the Camino in Spain. And Brian and Peri have been quite public about their own journey on it, and that's what we get to in the interview. But before we get to them, I'm going to light our candle today and just invite you to pause and reflect. First of all, are you finding yourself in a temporary space right now? Are you in a crisis? Are you in a life transition? And this is just an opportunity to reflect before we get to the interview. What's God doing? And of course, as we light the candle, also the confession that it may be hard to know. It may be hard to see what God is doing, but just going to invite you to reflect on whatever temporary space you find yourself in. All right, Brian and Peri Zahnd, you guys are known for so many different kinds of things. We could spend the whole episode just talking about Bob Dylan or, most recently, Nick Cave.
Yeah.
Come on, Brian. Yeah. Nick Cave on Stephen Colbert just brought it.
Yeah. I mean, I read his Faith, Hope, and Carnage when it came out like last year or whatever. That guy's interesting. Is he from Perth? I know you're from Perth originally. Was he from Perth? I know he's from Australia, but I don't remember where.
Yeah, he is from the motherland. He's from Melbourne originally.
Somehow I thought there was a Perth connection. Maybe he's talked about it or something. But yeah.
Yeah, but we wanted to ask you guys, we'll probably cover a few things, but you guys are Camino fanatics. Maybe we could start with Spain, the most famous Camino. Peri, when did you first walk the Camino?
We first walked the Camino de Santiago, the Francis route, the long one, starting in France, actually, and then crossing the Pyrenees, 500 miles across Spain. We walked it in 2016, September of 2016.
For the first time. Yeah.
For the first time.
The first time, yeah. And you've already shown up large and in charge here, Peri. You're flexing on those who do the shorter Camino, but 500 miles.
No,
How
it's
long did
just
that?
clarification.
Yeah. How long did that take?
40 days.
40 days.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe for people who have never done any kind of pilgrimage, maybe just give us a sense of, okay, what in you decided to do this, and then let's get into what it was like along the way.
There's an interesting story. I say it's interesting, might be boring, but there is a story. And because we were just talking about this before we began recording. In 2012, there was a presidential election. But I just thought it was like the worst thing that had ever befallen us, that, this political madness. And I told Peri, I said, 4 years from now, when this rolls around again, we're going to get out of the country. And I said, I don't care where we go, but there has to be an ocean between us and America during the final stages of the political season. And so Peri is the one that we saw the movie, and everybody's seen the movie, The Way with Martin Sheen and all that. And I think you hear the story a lot on the Camino, or by people that have walked the Camino, especially among Americans. How did you hear about the Camino, or why are you walking the Camino? They say the movie. So we saw the movie in probably 2012, and then just said, okay, we're going to do that. So we waited 4 years. But
yeah, we did wait 4 years. And I mean, it was very much God's timing for us to go in 2016. It was good to be away during all the campaigning and stuff, but it was just our hearts were really tired.
Well, it was our first significant break from the full-time ministry of pastoring Word of Life Church in 35 years at that point. We'd gone on some vacations, 2 weeks. Early on, we didn't even hardly do that. But I mean, we would take kind of a typical American 2-week vacation, but we'd never had any substantive absence from pastoring the church. And so that was our first time to do that. So there were a lot of things going on. So we'd been with one church 35 years. We'd been through, if people may or may not know our story, this very difficult theological, spiritual transition of our church that had taken about 10 years to accomplish, trying to move away from what I dismissively described as easy, cheesy, cotton candy Christianity, or maybe American consumerist Christianity and American nationalized Christianity. And we successfully did move our church into a much better place, but it didn't come without a cost to our congregation, a cost to our own souls. And we were probably more wounded from that experience because we lost like over 1,000 people. So we were probably more wounded by that than we even knew. So I don't want to just dominate all the conversation here.
And so we went.
Well, and
it was the greatest thing we ever did in our lives. I mean, it was the most, it was just, it healed our souls.
Yeah.
In surprising ways. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time.
We actually do kind of sometimes think of our lives as, you can, divide your life in a lot of different ways, but one way is pre and post Camino, that first one, because it really did change us. It just brought us into I don't know how, we can talk about it, we can go as deep as you want, but I can say it simple. I can say on September 14th, 2016, we began walking the Camino de Santiago, carrying more anxiety, more pain in us than we knew. Mm-hmm. And 40 days later, it was gone. Now, that may sound like hyperbole, but that's just kind of a sober assessment of actually what happened.
Yes. Yeah. To the point of being miraculous. We were healed. God healed us.
No, I wouldn't say we knew that was going to happen. This is something we decided to do. We thought it would be good. We thought, we knew it'd be spiritual, but I don't think we expected to be so different at the end of it. That we weren't anticipating that.
There's a camp an hour and a half from our church, and it's the camp that our church uses for our kids, for our retreats, adult retreats. We've been going there for 20 years now. And we were down there ordaining one of our pastors, and I asked the camp director to give just a little devotional before we ordained Renee, our dear friend. This was a camp that was so precious to her from her childhood, and so that's where we chose to ordain her. And Dan, I wasn't expecting much. I just thought, oh, Dan will open the Bible. And he did a journey through the scriptures of how God works uniquely in temporary space. He was saying, This is why we go to camp, is this temporary space. Yeah. And he was showing, Jacob as he's fleeing and so on. And in some ways, Camino is like a really intense temporary space. What does that evoke in you guys when you hear that idea?
Well, you are a different person walking the Camino, especially one of the longer versions. If it's only, and I mean, people can do what they can do, but if it's a week or two, it's kind of like a holiday, a trekking holiday. You spend more than a month. You become a pilgrim. I'm a pilgrim now. In another life, I'm a pastor or whatever you are. But when you are spending more than a month where your only real task is to get up in the morning and walk 12 to 15 miles west. That's all you do, and then all that you have to do to make that possible. But so your life is very different.
Yeah, your life is very simple suddenly, rather than a to-do list and all the stress that's involved with scheduling and getting everything done. And I've got to do this and I've got to do this. There is an emptying out. And all I have to do is walk.
Yeah, your life is reduced to a blessed simplicity.
Yes, and walking is very simple. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy. You can be very tired, but it's a completely different kind of, there is a rest involved. Mm-hmm. The Sabbath rest, perhaps, if you think about a sabbatical, there's a rest with the Sabbath. And so I think we experienced some of that.
So, Peri, take us to day one. You are looking at 40 days ahead of you. What's going on in you in day one?
We didn't know it was going to be 40. We didn't plan. It was like, we'll see how long it takes.
Yes. So day one on that particular Camino, starting in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, you cross the Pyrenees Mountains. And it is considered to be like the hardest day of the entire Camino. It just happens to be the first one. And it was glorious. It was really beautiful. Mm-hmm. Loved it. We just walked. There was,
we'd done enough hiking over the decades in the mountains that a strenuous mountain hike wasn't daunting to us. But I just think a lot of people were probably shocked that first day.
Yes,
because it is long and hard.
There was a sort of a euphoria that carried us. And I did not realize when I was done how tired I was. I was really exhausted. Sometimes it's good to get that tired when it's your body and not your mind. It's a good thing to do with your body.
And then there's got to be days in that middle section where you hit some kind of emotional wall or physical wall. Did that happen to you guys?
It's called the Meseta. And it's, you walk 500 miles, you're going to encounter various kinds of terrain. And right in the middle, there's this long, flat, largely featureless stretch of about
it's probably the longest.
It's probably 200 miles.
Right. Yeah.
It's 200 miles of
Midwest farmland.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And all cornfields look the same.
Yeah.
And it was hot.
Yeah.
And it was just hard. People had been talking, and the guidebook said, that we are, at some point, 2 weeks in, you reach the dreaded Meseta. And, there's this ominous sense. Why is it something to dread? And they say it's physically easy, but psychologically difficult.
Except it wasn't physically easy for me because that's when, on this first Camino, I developed some really bad blisters. And so I walked the first part without blisters and ended without blisters. But that Meseta I don't know if you've, just try walking 200 miles on blisters.
Bad blisters.
Yeah, bad, not little ones, but real bad blisters.
Thank God for New Zealanders, right? With their merino wool. Isn't that the secret to the Camino blisters?
Well, actually, Spain has a better product.
Oh, come on, Peri. That was unnecessary. I feel like that was choosing violence all of a sudden against our Kiwi sisters and brothers. Okay, so Spain's...
Well, yeah, for socks and stuff. Yeah, it's great.
That's true. That's true.
Merino wool's the best for socks.
Yes.
How about crossing the finish line then, that final day, you're going to walk into town, there's the chapel. Tell us what that's like.
Why don't you talk about the when you got your certificate?
Okay, I will, but I want to say something before I will say that because I think that's moving. That was the only day we had a fight.
It's true.
A husband and wife, walking together for 39 days, no fights, and we had a fight on the last day. And in retrospect, I can see how it happened.
Uh-huh.
And it's different because we were like, I don't know, we were like 3 kilometers from the end. I mean, it's like, we're there, 3 more kilometers. And Peri wants to stop and have lunch. I'm like, let's just walk 3 more kilometers, then we can celebrate and have lunch. And this became a problem. And the difference was, I can see it now. I understand now. I didn't understand then. That I wanted to complete, the goal. Peri didn't want it to be over. And so she was wanting to extend the experience of being, because once when you do finish, you're no longer a pilgrim. I didn't want to be done so much as I just wanted to achieve. I did it. I made it. I'm there. And so that was a problem. Okay. But when we did arrive at the cathedral, and then actually the pilgrim office is right by the cathedral. And do you get your Compostela, your certificate because I should have had one with me here, but when you're walking the Camino, you're given a credencial, and 2-3 times a day, you stop at a pub, you stop at a bar, you stop at where you're staying, and you get a stamp. And this kind of proves that, you've actually walked this whole thing. And you go to the Camino office. It's connected with the cathedral. And there's kind of a formality about it. And you go up and you present your credencial, and they examine it quite carefully, and they look at it, and they'll ask you some questions. Why did you walk the Camino? It was in Spanish. And so I was really struggling to try to, with my very limited Spanish, to respond. And then finally, the man that was attending to me took out a big stamp, and he put the final stamp in my credencial. And this is the only time he spoke to me in English. And he says, "Your Camino is finished." And tears came. I started crying because that was the moment I realized, I don't want it to be over. This has been the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't. What do you mean it's finished? And I found it very moving. Yeah.
Scott McKnight famously said that people grow spiritually either when they're in a crisis or when they're on a quest.
Mm.
I think what's fascinating about you guys is, to me, as somebody who's followed your work for 20 years now, 15 years, the Camino is kind of metaphorical for your whole spiritual journey. You guys have been on a quest for how long? I mean, since your early 20s when you first planted the church?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, over 40 years now.
What are you hungering for right now?
I don't know. I can't. You don't always know. I mean, you stay on the journey And then the journey itself surprises you. I think I've learned over the years to not put too much definition on anticipation. And so what am I yearning for? To stay faithful, just to stay on the journey, keep following Jesus. What's it going to look like? What do I expect? I expect to be surprised, because that's really the way it is. And I mean, this is part of what, you don't have to be on the Camino very long before you realize this is a powerful metaphor.
It is.
For life and for the spiritual quest. And what's interesting is everybody gets that. You know, I mean, we're committed Christians, pastors. You know, the vast majority of people walking the Camino probably would not describe themselves as a committed Christian, certainly not a pastor. And yet everybody senses the spiritual component. I mean, literally everybody. I haven't met anyone. You meet plenty of people that are completely secular, atheists perhaps, but they recognize they're doing something that is deeply and profoundly spiritual.
They do. They do. So there is, though, this mystical quality of the Camino itself, the path itself, the way. I think it's related to the faith of all the millions of people. There were 500,000 people in the 11th century walking this particular pilgrim path. And so, we did take one day off in the middle for sickness. Brian's terrible blisters, and I had a really bad cold. So we took this day off. And I remember watching pilgrims going by where we were sitting outside and just feeling this like a magnetic draw, like I should be there. I'm missing out. And of course we were the next day. But
it was the only day we took off, in Fromista.
Yes. But I mean, there is a mystical quality about the Camino itself. And so one of the things that people say on the Camino will provide. The Camino will give you whatever it is that you need. And I remember texting this back to a friend at home, and she gently corrected me, and she said, "You mean that God provides?" Well, of course, God is the provider. God provides through the Camino, but there's also this sense that the Camino itself, this spiritual quality that, just it is imbued with it. And so that's one reason why we keep being drawn to go back.
Here, we can move on whenever you want, Steve, but there's this an interesting story. So in 2016, we walked the Francés Camino. Did we do anything in 2017? We didn't do anything. In 2018, we did the Portuguese for the first time. And then in 2019, we went back to do the 500-mile Francis route a second time. And this was nothing but a delight. Peri had a lot of sore feet. She didn't have the blisters quite like I had them, but she just had
on the first one.
On the first one, her feet were very sore. Mine were blistered for at least 200 miles. We'd walked this second time on the Francis, and it was like a victory lap.
Yeah,
there was no pain. It was never difficult. It was just
fun.
And we were musing about this. Why? What's the difference? Because we couldn't really figure out anything we'd done differently. And as we're walking and talking and thinking about it, we lighted upon this explanation. I think there might be something to it. That in 2016, more than we even knew, we were bringing a lot of pain with us to the Camino, interior pain. And just, through the long struggle and all of that. And as we walked the Camino, because we already told you that when we finished, that pain was gone and was replaced by peace, and a peace that never left. But it was as if the Camino was pulling that pain out of our soul, through our feet, down into the path, and it remained there. So that when 3 years later we did the exact same walk, the exact same place, exact same time of year, everything's the same, we weren't carrying that pain within us. And so it was an easy walk.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds very mystical, but I think it's probably actually true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you guys do describe a pre-2016 and a post-2016 posture shift.
Yeah.
Yes. When we came home, we were different people.
Yeah.
Very
True.
different people.
And how was that for your congregation?
Here's what I don't know that they noticed. Maybe not. You have to ask them. But we began 20 years ago now, what we call our water to wine journey, finding a better, richer, deeper, more historic Christianity, moving away from the charismatic consumerism that, that isn't how we started, but that's, just the trajectory that if you stayed a part of that movement, it eventually led there. It took us about 10 years to transition the church, 2004 to 2014. So by 2014, we were what we were and what we are today. It was kind of done. But we were still carrying the wounds. I think we hid them pretty well. And I think that was wise on our part.
It was what we needed to do.
I mean, not to hide it from everybody, but we weren't demonstrating publicly to the congregation how wounded and hurt we were. I don't think that would have served any purpose had we done that. But when we came back, there was we didn't have any of this to hide, and so we were more at peace. Whether the congregation noticed that or could tell, I don't know. That's a good question. What do you think?
I mean, it was very subtle. I mean, but maybe a change in the atmosphere.
I think maybe the people they're very close to us, maybe leadership team people, they probably noticed. But I would say the congregation in general just said, "Oh, they're back." they were very happy.
It's also quite common, I think, that a leader hides their wounds, and then there's a second category of wounds, which is the ones that the leader is surprised by, like, "Oh, I didn't realize that I was carrying that, or that had a hold of me." I wonder if that was part of your experience as well.
Yeah. When I say, we were hiding it, not in a sense of pretending that we're something other or something I think would be shameful. I think really it was more of a case of, parents, if the family's going through financial difficulties, the parents actually probably need to not burden the children with that. Let them think everything's fine. So it was in that sense. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. That there was more pain in us than we knew. I won't talk for Peri, but for me, I'll say that was certainly true. That was definitely true.
Yeah. And then God healed us.
Yeah.
And continues
we're not trying to put a brave face on it. We're just this is the truth.
Yeah.
Those pains are gone. They're just gone.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wrote a book on, it's called Water to Wine. And I don't know. I think it came out in I don't know when it came out. But if I look at that book today, I think it's a pretty good book, but I think also I downplayed how difficult it was, how painful it was in the book. Even though I actually do tell you how painful it was, but I'm thinking if I look at it now, I go, no, it was harder than that. But that's because it was before the Camino.
Well, and also I think my take on it as a third party is you're younger back then, you're running pretty hard.
Yeah.
So you're running injured or you're playing injured, but you don't really realize what you're carrying. In our congregation, we had 4 young dads die in 5 years.
Oh,
and 3 of them were dear friends of ours. One was the chair of my elders. One was a volunteer worship leader we had. And all of that kind of caught up with me when I stopped to reflect, but I was just going. Like I knew I was grieving, but I do think it's common, particularly in church leadership. I'd like to get your take on this. We're so focused on helping others and shepherding that we don't always attend to our own wounds or let others attend. At least in my case, I'm much more comfortable helping than asking for help. I don't know if any of that resonates with you guys, but that seems to be a common experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes. And because I encounter pastors constantly who are very alone, I would say Peri and I didn't have that. We were not necessarily displaying our wounds for the whole congregation, because as I said earlier, I don't think that would have been wise. But we did have friends, other pastors kind of around the country that actually we're very close to, and we're completely honest and open with that.
Yes. For me, I was led by the Spirit of God to a Catholic Benedictine spiritual direction program in 2014. And I mean, really a cool story about how the Spirit just opened doors for me to do that. But that's where I experienced just an ability to learn how to open up and share my feelings, and that my feelings did matter. It was perhaps a blessing. I'm sure it was a blessing in that it was a Catholic atmosphere. These people don't know my world. They don't know me. And I could just I wasn't Peri Zahnd, the pastor. I was just Peri. I was just a participant in the program. And I experienced a lot of healing in that program, which I had already been in for 2 years when we went on the Camino.
Yeah, it was a 3-year program, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Peri, Brian in some circles is a lightning rod. It's always interesting to me when you are putting out what you are convinced is very orthodox, straight down the line gospel teaching, and people in social spaces or public spaces act as if it's radical or crazy, right? Like that's always a disorienting experience. Peri, what's it like for you when you see people taking shots at your hubby?
I guess it's been going on for so long that it's just kind of normal. Sometimes I involve myself in those things, and sometimes I just stay away. And particularly social media, which, it's a blessing when it's a blessing, and it's a pain many times. But what's wonderful is that when he has friends who will stick up for him, and he doesn't have to, and I just completely stay away from that.
Yeah, I want to say I mean, I know that I'm going to get those hits, and it can be annoying at times especially when you're misrepresented and maligned you're convinced unfair. It can be annoying, but it doesn't cause me any pain. I just figure it goes with the territory if you're going to do some public theology, especially if you're going to challenge some things.
It doesn't cause you any pain?
Not pain. It can be annoying at times, but I don't walk around feeling wounded by it.
And I would say that I am far less affected by that than I used to be. But
Sure.
Occasionally, it will cause some pain. Then you have to take it to Jesus.
Well, we've got over 200 episodes where guests have cheerfully endured my gauntlet of anxiety questions. Now, I'm interested with you guys because I suspect your pre-2016 answers would be quite different than your 2024 answers. But I'll throw questions out. You guys can pass or play, and let's see if we can endure the gauntlet together.
I'm up for it. I don't know if Peri will be or not. We'll see.
Yeah,
I looked at him real quick, like a couple of months ago. I don't remember any of them. So
good. That's the way I like it. I'm not comfortable when my guest is relaxed. So, just kidding. But let's start here. When you think about your family of origin, Brian, we'll start with you on each question, and then Peri, you can either pass or play. When you think about your family of origin, what would be one asset and one liability that you've inherited from them?
I came from a very good family. I was lucky in that sense. The asset was a commitment to doing things right. And the liability is a commitment to doing things right. It's both. It's the same. I got that definitely from my parents. Yeah, maybe a little more from my mom in certain ways. And it's both. my asset and my liability. So if things aren't done right, I'm irritable. I'm irritated by it, and I can be too critical at times. But also, it serves things well too to really say, no, we're going to do it right. So
I came from a good family too, and I would say my parents taught me how to work.
Oh man, oh man,
and they believe in work. Brian one time said to me, "Sometimes I think you work just to be working when you don't need to be working." And I've had to kind of work through that.
You need to work on working so much.
But I'm glad to have that strong work ethic.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the liability?
Oh, that's the liability.
Oh, see, you're just doing my game,
yes,
but okay.
But it's the truth. Because your weaknesses are always your strengths pushed to an extreme.
Good. That's right. Yeah. In fact, that Peri is the heart of our whole approach is you look at your gifts from God and then put them to an extreme twisted. That's your source of anxiety most typically. Yeah.
Absolutely.
In my family of our origin, cusses help others, cusses never ask for help. That would be the asset and liability in a nutshell. And what's challenging for me is that almost sounds like gospel. Like that sounds like, pastoring, helping others. It was a hard lesson for me to realize my job is not to care for everyone in this church. My job is actually to set up a culture where everyone is cared for, including me. Yeah, and that goes against my family, what we call the family propaganda, even though it comes from a beautiful place. Brian, let's throw this one at you. In your leadership, where do you keep running into yourself? Is there one trait you wish you could break?
Man, my leadership. I don't know. What do I keep doing wrong, Peri?
Pass.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm going to answer from an earlier time. Because I can't say now. Because I'm so relaxed in my leadership now. We have just such a good team, and it's easy. I would say early on, I avoided conflict. And then until I couldn't avoid it, and then it was big. And if I had just been if I hadn't avoided conflict and dealt with it when it was small, I wouldn't have had to wait till it was such a big problem and then I was just basically angry. But that doesn't happen anymore. So that's an assessment from an earlier era of my life.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think a lot of leaders, I think the besetting sin of my leadership is if I just give people enough space and time, they will do the right thing on their own, which is code for conflict avoidance. And then when you finally bring it up, somebody's like, it makes it 10 times worse. How about a behavior in others that you guys judge?
I don't know, this sounds self-righteous if I say this, but what comes to my mind is I don't have a lot of tolerance for people that aren't merciful to other people. Spiritual bullies. I've always been the kind of guy that would, like in high school, I would get in fights with the bullies because I have a little tolerance for that, and that'll bring out. We call it Fry. My nickname was Fry because of my temper, and what will bring out Fry in me is bullies. But that sounds like that's an attribute, but I don't know that it is. I'm going to be careful with that because I can then be because so you don't like bullies, so you bully the bullies, right? So I want to be careful. I don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really can't think of anything particularly.
Peri's the best Christian I know, so that's not hardly fair.
I mean, I get convicted about being judgmental frequently, but I can't say it's always about the same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. When the local church is at its best, what is something it offers that you cannot get anywhere else?
Oh, man.
I think that one of the great things about local church, when local church is the way it should be, is that you have the opportunity to learn to love all kinds of different people that you would not even really know existed, because we live in our own little orbits, and church is the place where all those orbits get to coincide. Um, you learn to love people you have absolutely nothing in common with, except that you both want to follow Jesus. And some of the greatest experiences of my life are learning to love these people.
Yeah, I think that there are people in our church, and I don't think ours is unique, that I know that they find dignity and honor, respect, genuine love and caring that they would not find anywhere else. These people, the winners, the people, the big ones, they're going to find this anywhere. But there are people who, if they don't find it at church, they're not going to find it. There isn't a substitute for it. I know I'm telling the truth right now. And that's why I get a little bit miffed with people who are done with church and say, well, we still have church. We get together with our friends and we have a meal and we talk about spiritual things. I say, look, I do that too. It's called getting together with your friends, having fun and a meal and talking about spiritual things. That's called friendship. It's great. I'm all for it. It's not church. Church is where the people that you would not invite into that space are there. And you learn to love them and you learn to care for them. At first it might just be, well, I got to do my Christian duty and try to be open to them and kind and listen. But you do that long enough and you're like, oh, I really do care for them. I really do love them. I really do want to help them. And I think that's very unique to the local church. I really do.
As I was listening to your answer, Brian, the first part of it about the dignity inherent for every person, that the church is required to see and celebrate the dignity of everyone. It brings to mind Sarah Rudin. She's a Harvard scholar, and Paul Among the People, her book, Paul Among the People, is quite provocative, but her idea that Paul prescribed a veil for women because a veil meant in the Roman Empire that you have status. And so these former slaves and prostitutes and current coming through the doors of the church, getting to wear a veil, meaning inside this place, outside there in the empire, you are discarded and exploited, and inside this place, you are precious. It's such a moving idea.
And it's an excellent book. So Peri and I will both frequently recommend Paul Among the People by Sarah Rudin.
Yeah. Okay, 2 more questions. Do you experience a gap between what you believe about God and what you experience from God? Like for many people, maybe they believe God's love, but they struggle. Or another way you might say it is, okay, my head believes in the freedom in Christ, but my body struggles to relax into God's presence. Is there a gap for either of you right now that you're grappling with?
That's a concept that I talk about a lot, how God is not something that exists in our brain, but that we need to have spiritual practices that bring it down into our entire being. Camino was good for that. It's that walking. It's just walking it out. And oftentimes, as we walked, we didn't have like periods of silence, prescribed silence. We talked whenever we wanted to, but you can only talk so much. And so there was a lot of silence.
Yeah.
And if I could share just real quickly, one experience I had that was profound. We'd been walking for several days and we stopped, every night we found some place to stay, a place to sleep, a good meal, a shower. We stopped at an albergue, this is what they're called, run by a Dutch ministry, and they invited everyone to a Jesus meditation service at 8 p.m. after dinner. And like, whoa, we'd never, experienced that, but I think I'd be into a Jesus meditation service. So after a very nice dinner, it was, I think it was shepherd's pie.
I think you're right.
We went to this meditation service. Didn't know what to expect. We went into their building. They were in a 400-year-old building, a stone building, and we went into this room that was empty except for cushions all around, on the floor along the wall with another cushion for you to lean up against the wall. You sit on a cushion, and the meditation service was an hour of just quiet, meditative instrumental music, punctuated by readings of 3 scriptures, 3 verses. They were read in 3 different languages, and but mostly just quietly letting the music, wash over you. And it was very nice and peaceful.
Mhm.
And calming. You enter into that state of just an openness to God. And then the 3rd scripture was read, and it was, "Come to me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Now, I have been familiar with that scripture all my life, but it was like thunder in my soul. It was like fireworks going off in my heart. I heard it like I had never heard it before. "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And I suddenly realized that Jesus had been inviting me all along into this, and I had been secretly disappointed in the scripture because I didn't feel the rest that I thought maybe everybody else was getting. And I suddenly realized, just, bang, I was there all of a sudden. It's just like the innkeeper who has invited us in every single night. "Come to me. I will feed you. I will give you a place to rest. I will give you, everything that you need so that you can get up in the morning and continue the journey." Now, if we had said, "Oh, we really like this place, we've just decided to stay," the innkeeper would have said, "Oh, no, 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 no. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to provide for you so that you can go on your journey, because you have a journey to undertake." And that is our spiritual journey. I mean, it was just, the metaphor was just so loud and out there. And I realized that Jesus didn't want to rescue me in such a way that he pulls me off of my journey. I got to get up every morning and face life, keep going. But he's given me exactly what I needed. That experience itself was enough. But it's just one of many experiences I had that were like that.
Yeah. If the question is there a gap between my thinking and my experience about God, I can respond to that pretty directly at the risk of being misunderstood. I say, really no, because even though I write books and function as a pastor theologian, it all originates in my experience, not in my thinking. My thinking and writing, even my preaching, is an attempt to articulate what is initially my subjective, mystical, spiritual experience with God. So it's actually rooted in, I think I approach theology intuitively. I mean, I intuit, experience, and then seek to express that. That's where it could be. I understand people could be very critical of that. But that's just the honest answer, that actually it's rooted in my own experience, which in defense, I would say, if you look at those that are presented to us in Scripture who dared to speak about God, that's what they were doing. They were actually speaking from experience, not this remove of, I'm thinking about God and, oh, here's what I want to say, and now I hope to someday experience that. For me, it's the opposite. It starts with the experience, and then I speak from that.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of experience, the final question is, when in your life lately have you felt most fully and completely loved? What was going on at that time?
I have an answer, but I'm gonna let Peri go. But don't know. Unless you want me, unless you need some time.
No, I would just say that, to be in corporate worship is, the blessing that the church is. I preached at another church this past Sunday morning, and whereas I was excited to do that, there was just this, I'm missing my church family and that corporate worship experience. So I think I feel most alive and most loved and most like centered. Here I am. It's every Sunday morning as we worship together.
I completely agree with that. I'm going to say, I bet you Peri's going to maybe at least appreciate what I'm going to say. Question is, recently, when did you feel most loved or experienced love? Back in, I guess it was April or May, St. Stephen's University conferred upon Peri and me honorary doctorates. And the ceremony was held at St. Mary's Church, the ruins of St. Mary's Church in Ephesus, where the Fourth Ecumenical Council was held in 431. I just felt, there were faculty and students, and they were there, and we were part of a trip through Asia and Greece in Paul's footsteps sort of thing. But to be recognized, I've spent a long time. We've spent our lives, doing the work of the ministry, trying to help people. And as you already alluded to, certainly have endured our fair share of criticism, maybe more than our fair share. But to be, recognized, to be recognized and to be loved are so close. And so I felt, recognized that what I had done actually mattered and mounted to something. And so that was a very special moment.
It was.
My guests, Peri and Brian Zahnd, both of them have published books. Brian is a prolific author. His most recent book, we'll have a link in the show notes, The Wood Between the Worlds, A Poetic Theology of the Cross. Brian and Peri, for me as a fellow pastor who is a little younger than them, they've been such a gift and continue to be a gift because they have chosen at some point to share their own personal journey publicly and to not just pastor a local church, but to pastor all of us who are willing to learn from them. And I always find Brian's writings to be provocative, inviting, hopeful, gospel-soaked. You can follow Brian particularly on a number of social media outlets. We'll have links in the show notes to his Twitter feed if you want to learn more about Brian and Peri. Thank you so much for joining me on Being Human.
It was a delight.
Enjoy it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
It's not hard to get us to talk about the Camino. It's hard to get us to shut up about the Camino.
That's true. That's true. And Steve, do you know that I wrote a book on the Camino?
Yes, I believe it came out in 2017. We'll have that in the show notes as well.
2017, right.
Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Let me check my notes here. Every Scene by Heart, right? That's the Camino?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We'll be having a link to that one as well.
Great.